Welcome to Stock Time to Improv. I'm Mary Scott with Business Riff, and I want startups to be wildly successful. One of the things that contributes to that is being visible. And today we're going to be talking about how you're supposed to work with the press when you're a startup. So I'm very happy to introduce Paul Riat from bizblip. Thanks for coming, Paul.
Oh, thank you for having me on, Mary.
So why is it so important for startups to not be shy when it comes to the press?
Well, the press can actually get them in touch with people that are outside of their network. I'm hoping that every founder out there understands the power of building their own network. Maybe not necessarily face to face anymore, but definitely through LinkedIn and other environments. They should absolutely have a network, and that network is probably their best first public relations. It's going to be the thing when they're in ideation that's going to give them some initial feedback. But when you're trying to get from like beta on or a good working MVP maybe on, and you're going to try to get people who don't know you to understand your product, you're going to have to be able to tell your story and really get down to here's what I'm doing, and I'd like you to try my beta, or I'd like you to come on, or I want you to pay me for my service. And being able to tell your story is something that you're going to have to develop all on your own. At some point, you may have an interesting story where there's a journalist who wants to tell stories too. That's what they do. They tell stories. Now, they don't work for you. They're not charging you for it. You know, anybody who charges you to put something in their online paper, I don't know. If it's not a scam, I kind of think it ought to be. It's certainly not regular journalism, but I'm talking straight-laced old media, some reporters trying to tell cool stories to people who are hopefully paying to read them. And that's where you're going to have to engage the media. It gets you not so much a better audience, but a bigger audience, a much bigger audience than you're able to get on your own.
Right. Especially since it's not just online. There's an awful lot of press that is offline, and it gets you into the heads of potential customers, potential investors who would not have met you otherwise. And like you said, it's free. So it's important to be able to talk to journalists, to answer their questions. Don't tell people what they think what you think they want to hear. You need to be really honest with a journalist because they're going to fact check you, right?
Hopefully, I would hope that there's still journalists paid and given sufficient time to do fact checking. It's difficult with the economics of news to say that's always the case. A lot of journalists are forced to churn out a massive volume of product and just don't really get the time that they used to.
Journalists are also very good resources. So if you're in a particular industry and a journalist this is his beat or her beat, they're in a position to introduce you to other folks that can also be helpful, whether they're collaborative or mentors or those kinds of things, right?
Can be.
Can be. So what's a big mistake that a startup would make when they talk to a journalist?
Well, I'm going to give you two, and it's kind of two flavors of the same thing. One is a company that's small enough where the founder, who has no competency in media, finds that they have to somehow engage or want to engage. The biggest problem they've got is they talk about features rather than benefits. I know that sounds ridiculous, but they send an email to a journalist and they want the journalist to do a story, and it is just one big gobbledygook mess of the intricacies of whatever it is they offer. And it's like it doesn't really say short and concise what problem they're solving. And I mean, it really should be very clean and simple. They don't need to put everything in that communication at all. They just need to put in enough so that the journalist goes, oh man, I want to do a story and find out more about that. The second one is when they're big enough that they've actually gotten some funding or they've got enough revenues where they want to offload this whole messing with the media stuff. They don't want to do it. So they hire somebody to do it. And that's when it really generally goes off the rails. The person puts out a press release. It says something that gets the media's attention. And the first thing that the media professional like me or my counterparts at the Business Journal or the St. Louis American or the Post-Dispatch, do is they call that media PR person and say, hey, I want to do a story on this. Can you get me in touch with someone who can speak on this issue? Perhaps the CEO. And the PR person says, yeah, how about next week? And there is no next week. It's right now. So you need to, as a founder who's paying for a public relations person, know when they're putting out a press release. And you should be able to step out of any meeting that you've got that day and take maybe a 5-minute phone call with the journalist. It's not like we're going to be chewing your ear off. We're trying to get information and get some quotes so we can put a story out for our readers. And we're under a deadline that we really want to turn this around fast. If your PR person hasn't coordinated with you, or if you have not made yourself available, and the PR person's response is, how about next week? Man, we're off to 5 other stories that we can do today. We're not going to get all of them done, but it's like yours just dropped from I'm going to do it to it's not even something I'm considering.
Right. Essentially, if you're talking to the press, you have to be absolutely available immediately, because if it's not important to you, why should it be important to the press?
Man, it's like the number one problem with somebody that puts out a press release is when you do get the media and then you can't get in touch with the founder. And it happens all the time. I'd love to say that's the exception, but it's almost the rule. And I've talked with my counterparts at the Post and the Business Journal about this several times. It's their biggest frustration and why they don't do stories that they would like to do.
Just because it's hard to get a hold of a CEO. Another side of that is if something bad happens,
Mhm.
you need to be responsive immediately. You never ever say no comment to someone from the press.
Well, that gets into crisis communications. And first, I'd like to calm people's fears. The economics of news are so dismal that really nobody has time to really pay attention to what you're doing. And you could probably, I don't know, do many, many bad things and no one would notice. But let's say something bad happens and you're concerned about it and you do want to get ahead of it. And I absolutely agree that if something bad happens, you do want to have at least a plan to deal with it. Because man, your competitors who are paying attention to you might tip off a journalist. That is possible, and it does happen sometimes. Number one is have a plan. If you don't have a plan, though, let's say you just get the call from the journalist. This is the like worst case scenario nightmare effect. You get a call from a journalist. They say, "Hey, we understand that XYZ happened with your product. Can you comment?" Well, first off, you're going to want to stall for time so you can come up with a better thing than abada, abada, abada and hanging up, because that's no good. Because they will write in there. They talk to you and you hung up on them, and that never looks good. You whatever the situation really is, it just got worse. So what you're going to do is do a legitimate and fair stall. You're going to say, first off, when's your deadline? So you need to know when you have how much time you have to make a response. Second, you're going to say, what's your email address? And the third one is, are there any other questions that you want answered? And you're going to just dutifully write down the questions. You're going to say, thank you, I'll have a response for you. But you come up with some sort of answer to those questions, and it has to be your answer. And you email it to them. And that's it.
Way to go. Well, thank you so much, Paul
Mhm.
from bizblip. Paul likes stories on tech startups in the St. Louis region. And I will put some contact information in the comments so that you can get a hold of Paul. Thanks again.
Thanks, Mary.
And I'm Mary Scott with Business Drift. I want startups to be wildly successful. And one of the best things you can do to accomplish that is book a call with me at businessriff.com. And join us again next time for Stock Time to Improv.